decision-making process, because even in that moment, right, where I'm getting an intuitive hit to look for the keys inside the bag, I have to trust, I have to decide actually that I'm going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Or am I deciding that I'm going to go upstairs and look for them?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that following that guidance builds that muscle of trusting our ability to make a decision and follow through with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's a big part of building our intuitive muscle, is deciding and acting.
Mm-hmm. All right, y'all, let's jump in. I'm here with Sarah and so excited to have conversation about intuition and following our intuitive nudges and just all the things that Sarah does on a daily basis as the spiritual guide that she is. So thanks so much for joining me today, Sarah.
Thanks, Hope. It's so good to be here with you.
Yes, I love it. So I was on Sarah's podcast not too long ago, and her podcast is basically her doing like intuitive sessions with people, which is really cool. So can you just kind of give the listeners an overview of what you do and just what your gifts are that you're sharing?
Yeah, sure. The way I love to say it is I live in devotion to creating spaces that allow people to live more fully alive. And so that incorporates a lot of intuition. Like through that portal of intuition is really my passion. And I channel information and do readings, but mostly I love to create programs and content and videos in ways that really draw people into their own lives, give them tools and exercises, meditations that really help them develop their own internal wisdom. So that we can really rely on ourselves. I believe that trusting our intuition is directly tied to trusting ourselves. And that's really the place that if we start there, we can really tap into what I call our inner authority. And it's that place inside us that knows. And it's our power to decide. It's our power to move our life forward in the direction we want, regardless of external circumstances.
I find so often that so many of us want to tune into our intuition, right? Like we want to listen to it. We want to follow those, intuitive nudges or whatever, but we question ourselves, or we question like, is that my inner voice talking? Like we kind of question if what we're listening to is the, quote, right voice. So I guess I would love to hear your thoughts on that and like kind of deciphering what is that inner voice and like, how do we, that trust that you're talking about, like, how do we really nurture that and build trust in ourselves and listening to that?
Yeah. For me, in my experience, it was practice, right? We're practiced to second guess that voice. And there's so much external distraction in our world that we just have really become accustomed to looking outside of ourselves for the wisdom. And in the beginning, I was the same way. I would get a nudge. I would get almost a direct message, like, look in that bag for the keys that you're looking for. I'd be like, no, they're not in there. And off I'd go. And, of course, you come back around and if the keys are in the bag. And it's really building a relationship with that part of ourselves. And just what I started doing was just following the advice or that part of me, right? Even if it didn't make sense, and just seeing what happened. And it built the trust in the guidance, in that internal decision-making process. Because even in that moment, right, where I'm getting an intuitive hit to look for the keys inside the bag, I have to trust, I have to decide actually that I'm going to do it. Or am I deciding that I'm going to go upstairs and look for them? And I believe that following that guidance builds that muscle of trusting our ability to make a decision and follow through with it.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of building our intuitive muscle, is deciding and acting.
Yeah. So when a lot of this and a lot of that kind of, tuning into the nudges and all of that, the trust comes with this, just kind of fostering a relationship with ourself. And I'd love to know what that looks like for you, because I know that can sound like really frou-frou and like fluffy and like, oh, have a relationship with myself. But there is, I mean, that's a piece of it. And that's a huge piece of it. So what does that look like for you? And to, I guess that, the people that you work with and what that looks like, and really focusing on that relationship with yourself to have that more like deeper trust in yourself and listening to that voice.
Yeah, what that's looked like for me is it focuses around the word abandonment. I feel that something happens to us and we abandon ourselves as one way of not having a relationship with ourselves. And when I learned to stay with myself inside of the hard moments, that began to change things, because then I wasn't alone. I had myself. And I know it gets kind of funny because I'm talking about the same person, but I feel like we have these multiple parts of ourselves. And some parts were created in our childhood, some parts in adolescence, and then we have all these voices inside us that are not our intuition.
Mm-hmm.
There are survival mechanism, coping skills, ways that we learn to handle situations because we didn't really have any other tools.
Mm-hmm.
And then those parts of ourselves are really misguided, but they love us. And they keep showing up saying, oh, don't do that. This bad thing could happen. You should really worry about this thing over here and there's a lot of noise. And so for me, having a relationship with myself really looks like including all those parts and sifting through them to see which ones are voices that there's real wisdom there. And then which ones were programs, unconscious programs that got it put into place throughout our life. And then using those programs even as a portal, as a deepening point to accessing, well, what's underneath that? What actually is really great about this part that I can also incorporate, because it's so easy. I used to shut all my stuff I didn't like about myself, like in a closet, basically,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, don't look in there. Let's have another drink and don't open the door. And and eventually I think there just gets so much stuff in there, or the knocking gets so loud on the door that you have to open it if you want to have any sense of peace or any real connection with life. And that's where I talk about being fully alive. It's having the courage to feel all the sensations so that we can be sensational, and including it all, and having the capacity to know ourselves at these deeper levels.
Yeah. I think that's a big piece of it, because I think so often, me myself included, like the parts you're talking about that we try to like shut down or like put in the closet, or let's not look at those. It's rather than, like you're saying, like feeling all the things, it's more of just like we just sit there and judge it. And so then the more we have this like self-judgment, and this can turn into self-hatred and other things, rather than just feeling it, and maybe even like bringing in curiosity, like wonder where that's coming from, right? And I think it's kind of a perspective shift on, like you're talking about, these other voices that we hear, like the kind of those more fear-based thoughts that come in, rather than judging them or just shutting them out, is like you're saying, like listening to all of them and honoring all of them, and kind of including all of those in, kind of how you're making decisions and all of that.
And I think, like, when I look back at where I was 20 years ago, inside of that self-hatred and absolutely, no self-esteem, constantly like concerned about what people think, anxious, depressed, so many things that were my life. And this is just how I thought it had to be. Like, isn't this life? That's all I've known. And then getting some support to see that there's actually another way that life can be, getting some perspective, really learning that reality is subject to my conditioning, my filter that I'm looking at it through, that it's actually neutral. It's what I bring. I make the meaning of my life. And these just simple teachings or ways of looking at things, reframing, were hugely transformative for me and allowed space inside me for me to actually hear a voice other than the cacophony of all the things, the terrible things that I would think and say about myself internally.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a huge one. I resonate with that too. I too know what it's like to have that self-hatred and self-esteem, all the things that like that. Yeah, that really resonates. Was there any like specific techniques or strategies or like practices that you implemented that kind of helped you through all of that and kind of helping you on this process of really tuning into your intuition?
Yeah, I would say one, a good therapist was a big portal the first time.
Totally.
Yoga, meditation, really finding those practices that are about wholeness, right? Reminding of us of our wholeness, giving us access to a version of God or the divine or spirit that is all knowing and all loving, right? Like consciousness, as opposed to the God I learned that just was waiting for me to mess up so that I could be punished.
Right. Right.
And that was a big shift where I really had a place that there was a form of love available to me that I hadn't experienced before. Because our parents, I believe they absolutely love us. I mean, the way I love my children, how could my parents not have loved me? But they had like zero skills on how to raise kids and how to create emotional stability or emotional capacity. And so from that place, there was a lot of feeling alone, a lot of feeling misunderstood. There wasn't a lot of just, oh, I get to be exactly who I want to be. And I don't have to fear being disapproved of or unloved in, in my child brain. That's the way that it was put together. So it was coming back to that and really deepening my desire to understand and know God. And I use the word God. Please, anybody who's listening, know that you can use whatever word fits and resonates with your heart.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So mine was for you, saying like funding your beliefs about things. For me, I had this realization like, oh, like I can actually have my own opinions about things. Like that was kind of a big piece for me, where it's like I can have my own opinions that don't have to be the same as my family or friends or whatever. Like just owning that piece where like, oh, I can form my own opinions and have my own beliefs and not have to worry about everybody agreeing with me or whatever. That was such a big one for me. And I think for me, realizing that for a long time, I'd had different beliefs than, a lot of the people that I grew up with or grew up around or family members or whatever. But it was just kind of suppressing those just to kind of go with the flow and just to kind of, like you were saying, I get just the fear of what other people are going to think or have them disagree. And I didn't want to rock the boat and definitely avoiding confrontation, as much as possible. So it was just like, I'll just say like, yeah, I agree. I believe this and I agree with this, and not really honoring that piece of me that was like, no, I don't really think I agree with that. Or like, this doesn't really sit well with me. Or like, this doesn't, I think that was a big one, is just owning I can have beliefs and opinions of my own and like, period, the end.
Yeah. Yeah, it's making me think of when I learned, and I think it's through a 12-step program where they say no is a complete
sentence. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Exactly.
I was like, what do you mean? I don't have to explain myself?
Exactly. Totally. Yes. Yes. I have to use that with my clients a lot. We're like talking about setting boundaries and stuff. Like, no, period. That's it. You don't have to say anything else. Like that's a big one. Okay. So yoga and like therapy for sure. Was there any point, so for you with your kind of intuitive gifts, I'll say, was there a point where, you kind of were fostering this relationship with yourself and kind of deconditioning all the things and all of that, was there a point where you realized that your intuition was, there was like a deeper sense to it, where you have these more intuitive gifts? Was there a point you had that realization and learning that you had a gift?
Yeah, it was gradual in the sense where, the layered effect, where it was like, oh, I feel like I'm more sensitive. I'm more open to seeing signs. And then I would explore that. And then there was more of a deepening. I remember the first time I had an intuitive reading, I was absolutely blown away.
Mm-hmm.
And this was close to 20 years ago. That how did this person who I'd never met before know all these things about me? Like in specific things, And that was absolutely fascinating. And I think I've always wanted to understand spirituality and where we come from, and more about spirit and the divine. And yet when I had that reading, it opened up a whole nother place inside me of curiosity and awe, really. Like, wow, what does this even mean? Like, how can she do that? And at the time, I did believe you had to be born knowing how to do that.
Right.
I just felt she was one of the lucky ones.
Yeah.
That she got to be born with this. And then here I am. I'm just going to keep going about doing my to-do lists and living into my Capricorn, archetype of astrology. And I don't have any of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I learned is that is not true, that every one of us is born intuitive. We're all connected. We're all the same. And we all share the capacity for these extra sensitivities.
Right.
And I just took a deep dive really into everything intuitive, watching videos, reading books, taking classes, doing workshops. And it just kept getting deeper and deeper. Like even now I think, wow, look where I'm at. And yet there's always some portal to go deeper that's available if I show up for it. So it's, for me, I feel it's a life endeavor. It's not something I used to believe it was something that I could get there. Right. Like, oh, once I can do this, well then, and I lived life inside of these sort of trade-offs, maybe, right? If this, then that. And that was one of the things that had to be dismantled on this journey, right? Is that everything's included, that I have to make the choice now. I can't wait until the thing.
Right.
And so for that, what that looked like was I had to leave my career when after my kids were born. And that was very challenging because where's the money going to come from?
Right.
And yet it all worked out. And then, it was diving into trainings that were more money than I'd ever spent before on workshops and trainings and programs and certifications. And somehow it all worked out. And then more recently, in the last couple of years, leaving my marriage. Like, because the more that I have lived as my authentic self, like you were talking about, like having my own opinions, making choices for me, there's way less ability to tolerate situations that don't support who I am as a person, who I came here to be.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think that piece goes back to kind of what I mentioned in passing, just about the boundaries, like setting boundaries for yourself and knowing, like, kind of, I don't want to say standards. I don't really like that word, but I mean, I guess in a way, kind of, you have a certain standard for yourself now, and just more in the lines of like, what's in alignment for me.
Yeah,
so I think the
values.
Yeah,
values
exactly.
Is a word.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. I like that word much better. Yeah. And understanding and then honoring like those values that you're setting for yourself. Because I think that's the other piece. It's like, okay, well, we can set these values that, we live by or whatever, but it's honoring those. That they don't mean anything if we're not setting those boundaries, or we're actually honoring those and like being true to ourselves with those.
Yeah, it's one thing to say these are my values, and it's another thing to actually make the choices in your life that align with those values.
Exactly.
That's the part that gets hard. We're
Yep.
really conditioned to say what we don't want, and to say we want this, but to take an action that actually supports something else. And we haven't learned, we haven't been taught how to bring our vision, our love and willingness, and our action all into alignment and bring them in the same direction. We say we want something, or say our vision is over here, but our words that we say don't support the vision.
Right.
And maybe our words do, but our actions don't.
Right.
And maybe part of us is really scared, or there's some old program running about, if I am successful, what does that mean? And so we're very disjointed.
Yep.
And for me, and this is what I love to teach about, is we bring these parts of ourselves into alignment. We bring all of what we say, what we do, what we think, and they're going in the same direction. And then we change our lives. Then something different is possible.
Yeah.
Because we're willing to show up for these things this way.
Yeah. Well, and I think so often we wonder like why things aren't working out the way we want or whatever. And it's this disjointedness that you're talking about with like the values and how we act on those are just not aligned. And it's not going to work out because we're out of alignment. There's a misalignment, and it's not gonna work. Yeah.
Yeah. We have to bring it back into and I do this a lot when I talk, and I think it's just because on my journey, this is the place where everything lives, right? Like, as I've collected all the different parts of myself and rewired and brought the attention from the external to the internal, I feel like my central channel has become stronger. The power lives inside me when I really cultivate it. And then this is where my intuition lives, because this is now my guidepost.
Right.
I remember when I realized a few years back where, even though it was really intuitive, it still felt as if I was referencing outside myself. And then there was this shift where I realized I was referencing inside myself now. Like, I wasn't second guessing my intuition. I wasn't needing to ask my guides for confirmation of signs. And because it was like the knowing, or the sensation that what is my truth, I feel it in my body. When I hear truth or know truth for myself, there's a sensation that goes with it that's undeniable.
Yeah.
And from cultivating the space inside myself and the relationship with myself, I can feel that and hear that now. Whereas before, that was just covered up by all the noise.
Right. Yeah.
And all the things I distracted myself with.
Yeah. I think it, I think it was, I don't know if I saw it on Instagram or it was a podcast, but just talking about this, like the truth thing being like a somatic experience, and where you really feel it in your body. And I think, again, kind of going back to we wonder why things aren't working out for us. But I think that's another piece of it too, is we've become so out of tune with our bodies. We don't know what that feels like, what the truth feels like in our body, because we've been so disconnected, right? We've just separated the whole mind body thing. And I really feel that's another reason why we get so, I guess, just out of alignment, right? We don't even recognize the truth in our body anymore because we've just become so disconnected from it.
Yeah, we as a culture and society, and we live in our heads, and we've given so much of our power to the mind.
Yep. We
believe that our thinking is the thing that is making us who we are. And yet it's not. It's actually a process. Like, as you develop your intuition, and this is where meditation is so important, because meditation does teach you. For me, my journey has been less about quieting the mind and more about learning to have the mind do what I say, rather than me do what my mind says.
Mm.
So I used a lot of meditation that was actually active and guided and was making me focus on specific spiritual principles, practices, exercises that allowed me to turn my mind on and off.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially now I do quiet my mind, but it's more through the practice of turning it on and off is kind of the way I relate to it more, or moving it out of the way so that then divine information actually has a place to come through.
Right.
Because if our mind is really controlling our life and is really the biggest part of us, then the spiritual information is just going to be right here. It cannot get through. That those thoughts are so dense because they're collective.
Right.
So they're everybody's thoughts.
Right.
And I'm connected in with you and, you know, everybody, and we're sharing all these thoughts. Well, there's nowhere for that spiritual information to actually come through into our nervous system, into our intuitive, like architecture that we have inside, you know, our pineal gland and the different ways we can hear different sounds through our ears. And for me, it's knowing is the biggest way that I feel or understand information. And I had to move the thoughts out of the way in order for there to be a place for that to come through.
Well, I think you made a good description of it, though, because I think with meditation, people do think that, because I see it the way you see it, the way, and I'm, you know, I don't share the same gift in that same way that you do, but I see it as you see it, because I think so often people look at meditation was like, oh, I got to turn off my mind. But like, it's impossible. Like, you can't turn off your mind. Like, it doesn't stop. So it's like you're saying, I like how you said, it's just kind of moving it out of the way to allow things to come through, right? Like they say, you know, prayer is you talking to God and meditation is listening, like receiving. So it's like moving things out of the way to be able to receive that.
Yeah. And the sort of what's dropping in is that analogy or metaphor maybe that's used about training a puppy. When the puppy comes and goes in the corner and pees on the carpet, and then you take it over and you put it on the mat, and then it goes off again, and then it pees on the carpet and you put it back on the mat. And it's like, that's how the mind is. It's like, it's just when even today, I mean, all these years later, if I'm not paying attention in my meditation, I'm thinking about picking my kids up from school, or, you know, some conversation I had the other day. And it's like, oh, hello, remember, come over and let's go back on the paper. Come on.
That's exactly it. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza, but he talks about that a lot. And he's like, so you stay talking, like telling your mind, like, nope, come back. Like, we're going to come back here. Here we are. It is like, you literally have to train it. Like you're saying, like a puppy.
Yeah. And it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things too, that maybe the misunderstandings or misinterpretations of the spiritual path, of the intuitive path, it doesn't happen in a week. Like, you can go to an incredible retreat and have some amazing life transformative experience. Like, I've experienced that. I provide that. Like, that is a thing. But the deep, deep love and respect for yourself and the relationship that you create with the divine, whatever that is for you, that takes time. Just like any relationship, right? You don't just go out for coffee one day with somebody and then, oh my gosh, you know everything about them and you're just deeply in love. Like, that comes after 10 years of walking through life together and 10,000 cups of coffee, or, you know, and conversation. Like, it's like that. Like, it's beautiful in those moments, and there's a lot that can happen. But that real deep trust and sense of security and knowing and real love is available when you put the time in, when you show up for the relationship with yourself and spirit in a devoted way.
Yeah, that's so true. It's so true. It is. And it's a a lifelong, it's like you were saying before about kind of that building those intuitive gifts. Like it's just a lifelong practice that you commit to, not this like final destination where it's like, I made it here. And that's the end. It's like, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. I know some of my spiritual teachers that are just so incredible, and really their relationship with their higher power and divine self is beautiful to witness. Like, I just love being in their presence. And they still show up with like, oh, well, I learned this today. I got something new to, and it's like even they are like exploring and expanding and deepening what it all means.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I like to sort of say, well, the end, once I get there, I guess that means like, that's the end of this life.
Right.
Because that's there.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I have a couple more questions I want to ask you as we start to wrap up, but I would love to hear just your take on, you talk a lot about purpose, which ties in nicely to the question I'll ask you as we wrap up. I ask everybody. But you talk a lot about purpose and kind of, what that means for yourself and kind of, find that guided by intuition. But I would love to hear your thoughts on like why, right? Like what's the big deal? Like what is the importance or the impact of us, leading with our intuition to find this purpose, of finding our purpose? Like why is it important to tune into this piece and like everything we're talking about, just kind of cultivating that relationship with yourself and your intuition.
So the words that come back up are fully alive.
Mm.
And I think about my own journey, and I've always been an adventurer. I've always lived a little bit outside the lines, and sometimes a lot outside of the lines. And I was always searching for something. And what I thought I was searching for was happiness. Like I was the person who, what do you want to be when you grow up? And my answer is happy. Like I never really knew. Yeah, I didn't know what I wanted to be. And that's another joke. I say I finally now know what I want to be when I grow up. I'm 50 and I figured it out. But there was always, it felt like something was missing for me, is the way that I experienced it. Like, well, if I just get to this next place and do this next thing, then maybe I can be happy. Yep. Then maybe I can feel okay. Yep. And I love this part because it moved me forward, and I traveled and lived in different countries and worked like so many different types of jobs and things. And it's really given me this big life. And I believe that our joy and our ability to really embrace our life lives inside doing what we love. And for me, the beginning of last year, I started an experiment where I would only let myself do what I love. I had recently moved out and, was filing for divorce. And as a way to heal from what life was like inside of that marriage, I committed to doing only what I loved. And it changed so many things. And it was hard sometimes because the old programming wanted to tell me, well, you have to do it this way. And where's the money going to come from? And you're being irresponsible. That's a huge one that I get.
Yep, for sure.
And, but that practice showed me that when I do what I love, I'm happy. And when I do what I love, I'm fulfilled. And when I do what I love, my life grows. And I grow. And so purpose for me, I guess it's not always about your job or your work. I think it's really connected to being in devotion to living your best life and choosing yourself and choosing what you would love, rather than telling yourself, oh, I can't do that because. Like living inside of limitation and doing that if this, then I can do that. Like once the kids are, in preschool, then I can do what I want. And there's this level of selfishness that I think we need to learn, that is in devotion to changing the planet.
Yeah.
Because while I'm out there trying to please everybody else, I'm not being true and authentic to my own heart. And then I show up angry and frustrated with the people I love. Whereas if I choose me and I'm willing to let them feel uncomfortable about what I choose, but they know I love them. Like what I'm choosing has nothing to do with my love for them. It has to do with my love for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, like my purpose is, yes, this work. Like I am so devoted to this. But I wrote out some declarations recently, and I'm like, there are things like I am an adventurer. I am a teacher. I am a surfer. Like there's also ones related to work,
Mm-hmm.
but I believe our purpose is bigger than that.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that make us feel alive inside
Mm-hmm.
are the things we should do.
I love that. Okay, I have one more question, which is actually kind of an extenuation of what you just said, but I'll ask it. I'll ask it anyway. But before I ask you our final question, what can you just let everybody know where they can find you, where they can find out more about you, and everything that you do with just sharing these gifts that you have and just the work that you're doing in the world?
Yeah, thank you. You can find me at sarahnoble.com, and I'm on social media at The Modern Day Intuitive. I do have a free gift on my website that I would love to share with you. It's called Ignite Your Intuition, and it's designed to lead you through a process that really helps you get in touch with yourself. And so it's a meditation and a workbook and an audio teaching. So
Perfect.
love to share that with you. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of info at my website about the programs that I host, and thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, for sure. I've got links to all that for y'all in the show notes. So I'm going to check out Sarah. So the last question I want to ask, which again, you kind of spoke to it, but I'm going to ask it because I ask everybody this question. But if I guess more for you, it's going to be more like narrowing it down. But what do you think is the most important thing that you can do to live with purpose?
That's a good question. Most important thing. Where I'm being drawn is to my heart. And I believe it's choosing you. Like, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
You're the person that you come into the world with, and you're the person you leave the world with. And you live every moment of every day with yourself. And when that person can be your best friend, you will choose you. Mm-hmm. And by choosing you, you expand your life in ways that are beyond what you can imagine.
I love that, Sarah. Such profound wisdom you dropped on us today. So thank you. This was so good. Thanks so much, Sarah, for sharing all of this and sharing your gifts with us and with the world. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hope it's really been a pleasure.